on 88.9 Win FM, the Cheryl Lacey Show, and we are curious and courageous in our conversations today. We've just had Tanvir Ahmed discussing mental health. Right now we have Sam Belfield, our human condition commentator, and we're going to talk to Sam, if I can get my voice right, about social media and critical thinking. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Cheryl, and good morning to your listeners.
Sam, you've mentioned that when I just called you that you listened to the previous interview with Tanvir Ahmed, and he did mention some very important factors around the changes to society and the impact that has on our mental health. And one of those changes is social media, which wasn't dealt with 30 years ago, and we're certainly dealing with the consequences of that now. What are your views generally on social media?
It's a very good question, Cheryl. I suppose, in summary, it's a force for both good and bad, if you like. And I suppose in terms of the work I do, supporting the work of Jeremy Griffiths, looking at the issue of the human condition, it's sort of, in a sense, accelerating the contradictory nature of our human condition, in the sense that, okay, yes, it's a tool for us to connect to, on one view, be about bettering humanity, searching for knowledge, trying to improve our fundamental human situation. But while we suffer from the human condition, and it links very much with what Tanvir was talking about a moment ago, in a sense, we're not particularly sound managers to harness the potential of it. So it's both a force for good and bad, if you like. Obviously good to talk a bit about that.
Indeed, and one of the challenges that we have that I notice too is this notion that we talk about the need for critical thinking. We talk about the need for looking after our mental health, and yet many of those things are absent on social media. People will respond because they like a person, or it already caters to their existing views or bias. And then you also see a lot of anger, which comes from people who are well-intentioned in terms of wanting rich debate. So it's quite challenging, isn't it? Because we don't see the eyes of the people when we look at the posts they've posted. And looking people in the eye and seeing body language, and certainly the manner in which we speak out loud, is very different to what you see on paper or on screen.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that, Cheryl. And I think there's this disconnect in the sense that, again, to sort of link it with the work I do, I'm suggesting that we've got this moral capacity, one of, trust, honesty, fairness, and what have you. And there's when we're talking to someone face to face, we have in a sense, a greater awareness of that humanity, and so the way that we interact with that person is relatively speaking much more connected. But when online, we're sort of saying that the defining features of the human condition you mentioned anger a second ago, is anger, sort of selfishness and alienation. And online, when we're, in a sense, disconnected from the person or the people we're perhaps talking about, those attributes of the human condition are greatly exacerbated and are not moderated by this other very strong dimension of ourselves, which is to be considerate, and this moral dimension of ourselves. So it's unhinged, if you like, at one level, and I think all of us would admit to being guilty of doing and saying things online that we wouldn't do in a face-to-face conversation.
The word unhinged that you've just used there is quite a powerful word, and thank you for doing that. That seems to be what does happen, and not just from what's posted. I would suspect it's also the reaction when you don't get the response that you're anticipating, or you've posted something of importance and it's been ignored or misunderstood, or there's a strong following against what your views are, all those manner of issues. Do you think people can become unhinged privately and then take that frustration, if you will, out on people around them? So that's where that face-to-face comes in and becomes problematic?
I think that's definitely the case, Cheryl. To sort of, in a sense, put it in a nutshell, there's this, I suppose at one level you could define the human condition as sort of as a self-hate, and And you mentioned that conversation with Tanvir, the concepts of guilt and shame. And so, in a sense, if you like, internally, we've got these demons, if you want to use that sort of language, or this insecurity about our fundamental worth. And because of the pain associated with that, a way of relieving that and in a sense, disconnecting from that is to project that outwards and be hateful of others. So we've got this self-hate, which we compensate for by hating on others. And, I'm not suggesting that that's unique to any one of us, but I think that type of behaviour is much escalated on social media.
Someone told me a number of years ago that it's none of my business what anybody thinks of me. And I've never forgotten that, and I think it's a very powerful message for all of us, because we are all free to think what we like. We're also free to say what we like. However, if we don't want to do any harm to anybody else, we restrain from sharing certain thoughts. But that messaging of it's none of your business what other people think of you, to take that on board and use it well, can, how do I say this, put a bit of a bubble around the possibility of this hatred that you're speaking of. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, again, I would agree with that, Cheryl. I think for me, the macro is that we're suggesting, in the context of the work I support, that we're living with this issue of the human condition. We've got this underlying insecurity about our worth, and there's an explanation of that in terms of our biology and our psychology. And in a sense, we're constantly, the thing is, we're actually disconnected. We're not aware of consciously that fragility, to use the term that you and Tanvir were using in the previous conversation. We're not aware of the fact that we're carrying this bias or this insecurity. So we have reactions, we say things, but we don't connect with, make the connection between what our emotional reaction is and things that we're saying and what is it that's actually motivating that. We might think we're approaching an issue in an objective and even-handed way, but in reality, a particular issue has, in a sense, triggered us or has encroached on that underlying insecurity in some way, and that deeply colours how we interact with a particular issue. And, often we fall into that trap of just seeking reinforcement, or if we don't get that reinforcement, then that escalates our insecurity and we respond with anger.
I think in many respects, one of the good things that can be avoided through social media is all of a sudden everybody going online and saying, I'm not coping, I'm stressed, I'm unhinged, I'm all of these things, and then a flood of these issues coming to the fore. We've already got enough of that, and you rightly mentioned Tanvir again and that discussion we had on mental health. We've swung the pendulum perhaps too far, and that's where this fragility comes in. I can only imagine what it would be like if everybody that was constantly active on social media suddenly started telling the world that they weren't coping. It would be a mess. So what would you suggest outside of psychologists, doctors and so forth, and certainly outside of social media, what would you suggest people do if they felt unhinged?
Well, I mean, that's obviously an individual thing. I think, again, in the context of social media, I think I look at it from the perspective of that it is this. It's an amazing tool in terms of the interconnectedness, the ability to cut across and provide alternative sources of information and communicate information, knowledge, insight in an incredibly powerful way. But and that's on the upside. It's got this potential that we're already realising. But on the other side of that, while we've been, if you like, unsound managers or operating systems in terms of the human suffering from the human condition, we haven't been sound managers of that, and so all the excesses of the human condition have just been supercharged. So as compared to 20 years ago, 50 years ago, when we're writing letters, this notion of that there is this if you like, issue of the human condition, and there's this upset state. That was relatively speaking, on a much slower burn, and the spread and the impact, the negative impact of that upset was moderated just because of the technology that was in place. Whereas that if you like, that degradation of our innocence, our freshness, our generosity, our trust is being depleted at a much more accelerated rate.
Sam, I wonder whether or not, and some of the little nuances and the words that you say really, really resonate, which I know our listeners do resonate with as well. And you just talked about the slow burn and letter writing. Extraordinary. And I wonder whether or not something like that, which is just so soothing, and we just don't have time to process, or we're not allowing ourselves time to process because we're constantly being bombarded with messaging on social media. I wonder if we just took some time out and wrote a few letters to some of the people we communicate with online. That might be a good way to start.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I mean, the problem is that even sort of that process of slowing down and contemplation, although it's got in tremendous merit, we find the acceleration of everything. There's an inherent sort of belief in that. There's a distraction value, and slowing things down involves contemplation. And even, they talk about now people's attention span is, 30 seconds a minute. And so at a general level, we don't want to do any deeper thinking. And the reason for that is that it brings this underlying issue of the human condition into focus, guilt and shame, which Tanvir mentioned, all that fragility. And we want to keep it very superficial and surface and stay almost just at a very reactionary level and not actually go any deeper. And that's obviously, we're suggesting that that's ultimately what we need to do. We need to look at this issue that's driving that feeding frenzy of distraction and reinforcement and actually bring explanation to that.
Sam, as always, your advice and your wisdom is of great importance, not just to me but to our listeners. I thank you again, and another important conversation around the way in which we manage social media and certainly look after ourselves. And let's hope that there is no hatred in the world and that we're all able to have that little bit of a slow burn and ensure that disappears and we do focus on ourselves and one another. Sam, thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you for the opportunity, Cheryl.
Have a great day. God bless.
See you. Bye.
Bye. That was Sam Belfield, our commentator on the human condition, and another very, very good and sound conversation from Sam. You're on 88.9 Win FM, the Cheryl Lacey Show. Coming up after this break, we have Mike Holt, our common law expert, and we'll be discussing digital voting, an important one, particularly also that this is happening in the United States. So we'll find out a little bit about the changes or proposed changes that Mike has for the way in which we vote in Australia.